Hi everyone, nice to see you all again. Today we're going to be looking at the following question. If you're learning Japanese, should you learn to write kanji by hand? The answer is basically no, you almost certainly shouldn't, but today we're going to spend a bit of time thinking about why not. Learning any genuinely alien language to a reasonably advanced level is going to take a massive chunk out of what you're capable of doing, intellectually speaking, in your life. I tend to say, and this is a consideration that I apply to my own language learning, that learning a language to a C1 level, an advanced level, is going to take you about 5,000 hours of applied effort. If you're not an abnormal person in an abnormal situation, that 5,000 hours is going to be spread out over a period of several years. During that period of 5 years, there are going to be a lot of ups and downs along the way, emotionally speaking. That's inevitable. It's always a long and complex process, and there will always be people who are capable of learning a language like Japanese well, but who quit anyway. They lose motivation, they realize that they're just not interested enough, and they end up quitting. What that means is that if you want to learn Japanese to a reasonably advanced level, and I'm saying C1 here for the purposes of this video, this discussion, you're gonna have to cut out as much irrelevant and useless activity as you can. You can't make this process any harder for yourself, right? You've probably already guessed what I'm about to say, but learning to write Chinese characters, i.e. kanji, by hand is essentially a waste of time for nearly all of us. If you don't have some pressing reason to do it, you shouldn't. Learning to write Chinese characters by hand is a massive time sink, and as you understand very well, in modern life we just don't write stuff by hand very much anymore. As long as you can read Chinese characters, then you can just type in Romaji, and the conversion systems on whatever laptop you're using, on whatever mobile phone you're using, will of course convert everything to kanji for you. Now, when I was studying Japanese at university a very, very long time ago, I had to learn to write Chinese characters by hand. I didn't have any choice in the matter. When we had exams, we tended to have two parts to our exams, a Japanese to English translation part and an English to Japanese translation part. And when we wrote in Japanese, we had to write everything by hand in Japanese, and you were graded on the extent to which you could write kanji correctly. That was part of the marking process. In addition to that, when I was studying kanji, I spent a lot of time just writing them out by hand because I assumed that that would help me learn them more generally. I assumed that that would help me learn to read them. I'm not that familiar with the relevant scientific research, but I get the impression that actually writing kanji out by hand doesn't do that much to help you recognize them. It doesn't do that much to help you learn them in that sense, and I can believe that that's true. So bear in mind that when I make these points about being able to write Chinese characters by hand as being essentially useless, I'm talking as somebody who actually went through the process of learning to do it. And that means that I can tell you from personal experience that being able to write Chinese characters is just about the most perishable skill I have ever acquired to any meaningful extent. If you learn to speak a language to a decent extent, you'll find that that ability won't disappear that quickly. Even if you don't speak Japanese for 3 months or 6 months or a year or even 2 years, as long as you had a decent level of it in the first place, you will find that you can speak it after a long period of not having spoken it. Yes, your vocabulary will suffer, especially your active vocabulary. Yes, you're likely to find it a little bit more difficult to make sentences as quickly and as easily as you used to be able to. That's all true. But at least in my experience, being able to speak, being able to understand when other people speak, these are quite robust skills that you're not going to lose that quickly. Unfortunately, writing Chinese characters just isn't like that. If you don't write them, if you don't practice, your ability to write will disintegrate quite quickly. You will be surprised, trust me. Even relatively common words written with relatively common kanji will reach a point where they're just not accessible to you that easily. So however committed to this you may consider yourself to be in the early stages of learning Japanese, I promise you that only a lifelong relationship with writing Chinese characters by hand will allow you to maintain a high level of ability in this specific regard. If you're not interested in that commitment of time and energy over years, if not decades, then you might as well just forget about it. When I look back on this aspect of my own university studies, I think that it was substantially a waste of time, and I think that academic programs that require people like us, people like me, to learn to write Chinese characters by hand need to adjust their thinking in this regard to some extent. Something else that I have to point out to you is that the physicality of just writing Chinese characters is really not that straightforward. The chances of you ever being able to write Japanese using Chinese characters neatly and legibly are actually quite low. Even if you're careful about this and learn all the correct stroke orders, which you really need to do, it's unlikely that you're ever going to be able to write these things well. I'm not talking about being some great calligrapher here, I'm just talking about the ability to write something that doesn't look like the doodling of a 3-year-old child. When you start writing Chinese characters, when you write Japanese, you may be very proud of what you're producing, but I can assure you that to most Japanese people it's going to look like chicken scratch. Even if they can read it, it's going to look like garbage. My Japanese handwriting isn't actually that bad. I suppose that's the consequence of having practiced so much when I was learning to read and write kanji many years ago. But I do understand that some of what I write probably looks a bit strange to Japanese people, and even some of my kana are not that well formed. There are certain kana that are just difficult to write. What I mean is it's difficult to get them to look authentic. Sticking with katakana and hiragana for a moment, whether or not you learn to write them is entirely up to you. Bearing in mind that it's not actually that difficult because there aren't that many of them, I would say that anyone with a long-term commitment to Japanese should probably try and learn to write katakana and hiragana reasonably well. Though you should bear in mind that Japanese written without kanji, Japanese written purely with kana, is always going to look pretty damn strange to Japanese people, and it's going to be relatively hard to read. Having said that, I want to reiterate that writing Chinese characters, and of course this is something that would apply to people learning Chinese as well as people learning Japanese, but nonetheless, writing Chinese characters, trying to learn to write Chinese characters, that is something that is best left to the natives in my opinion. Don't do it, don't waste your time with it. Japanese is hard enough as it is. Now, if you have some sort of unusual passion for Chinese characters or for East Asian writing systems, or if you've chosen some sort of career path that absolutely requires you to learn them, then there you go. It's simple. You're going to learn them, right? Your mind's already been made up by the decisions you've made. If, on the other hand, your desire is to be able to function in Japanese, to speak it, to understand it when people speak it to you, to read a book, to read a novel, to read a manga, whatever it may be, then I very strongly suggest that you focus on developing those skills specifically. That fundamentally is what is going to make or break you as a student of Japanese. And if you do decide one day in the future that you want to start learning to write these things after all, then you can always go back and do it. But don't let it turn into a barrier in these crucial early stages of your studies. That's my advice to you. Don't let it turn into a time sink that sucks up hundreds of hours. It's just not worth it. That's all for today. If anyone wants to say anything about any of this, they're very welcome to. You can agree, you can disagree, you can partially agree, you can say whatever you like, leave a comment. I'm always happy to discuss things. Always happy to be told that I'm wrong as long as people are reasonable and have reasoned arguments. And that's it for today. I'll see you all next time. Thanks very much. Bye bye.